So, what is your relationship with fear? So, I don't know about you, but when I was young, I realized that my fears were actually a misinterpretation about the world in which I lived. For example, I thought quicksand was something I would face at some point in my life. Maybe it's from watching Gilligan's Island. I don't know, but my brothers and I used to actually strategize, like what would we do when we got in the quicksand later in our lives, right? I would just imagine myself being stuck and unable to get myself free. And I actually was also very worried about the mafia. Okay, so I remember being worried that somehow I was going to get into the mafia by mistake and not be able to get out. Okay, so can you see how those two fears are related, right? Overall, I was afraid of not being strong enough or smart enough or whatever to get out of a situation beyond my control. So thankfully, I was able to get a little bit more information and leave those two fears behind. But I can see that I carried that fear for a long time, just about different situations, not quicksand and the mafia. So we can talk about that more in a second. But what about Halloween? This is a special time of year when we kind of play around with the idea of fear. So back when I was young, sometime in the 1970s, when I was worried about quicksand, my father took our whole family to one of those early haunted house attractions sometime around Halloween. Some organization in town took an old, dilapidated Victorian kind of house and created and kind of spooked it up, created this haunted house. And there were cobwebs on the outside and creepy lighting and sounds. And I can remember just standing in that line and my heart just racing as I could hear the screams going on inside the house. And once inside, as you can imagine, if you've ever been in one, there were monsters jumping out at us and fake chainsaws and bloody faces and all those things. And there were arms reaching and grabbing me and yelling at me and all those things as you kind of push through the dark and the maze and all of that. And I just would get more and more scared by the moment. When I stumbled out the back door, I was kind of crying and kind of laughing, kind of in between, but I made the decision right then and there that I would never, ever go into a haunted house like that again, and I have never done it yet. So, and I've been invited to go to these professional haunted houses. No, thank you very much. I just don't like to purposefully be scared like that. And it took me a few years to realize I don't really like creepy movies either. Like I don't like those either. I think The Exorcist scarred me for life, and I've still allowed myself to be talked into some scary movies every now and then, but eventually I just cover my face and sink down in the seat, and I'm like, this is just wasted money, and I'll just eat the popcorn and not do that anymore. So those two things, haunted houses and scary movies, made me realize that in addition to being afraid of a situation out of my control, I had this underlying fear of the unexpected and my ability to survive when scary things were happening and challenges would come into my life. And I also had a fear of death, which was the whole quicksand thing. But anyway, so I might not have quicksand and mafia or monsters or faces or anything like that. You know how they just show up in the mirror behind you? Yeah, I don't like that either. But I can see how those are like fears that actually represent more real fears that I have. So we all have this lifelong relationship with fear. And I actually just articulated three of the biggest fears that most humans carry. One, the fear of not being enough. Two, the fear of the unknown. And three, the fear of death or loss. And if you can think of something you fear right now, it probably goes underneath one of those categories, right? And those three common fears can be triggered by a bajillion different situations or stimulations or whatever. But I think that most of fears can be summed up by one of those three. And so, as I said, we all have this relationship to fear and the physical and emotional and mental experiences that come with being afraid. And so, my lesson today is called Know Fear, Know, fear. And it's an invitation for us to take another look at our relationship with fear. And I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time, so why not Halloween, right? So, see, here, I want to just broadly say this. So, anything, anyone or experience or whatever, anything that evokes a lower vibration within your being, or the things or the people that you fear, anything that evokes a higher vibration in your life are things that you love right? So if we want to improve our lives, we've got to move away from fear and spend more time in the vibration of love, right? Ernest Holmes talks about why we want to do that more. He says, fear blocks the more complete givingness of the spirit to its highest form of manifestation on this planet, which is mankind. Fear arises from that mental attitude which limits the possibility and the willingness of spirit to give us that good we so greatly desire. Fear is a belief in limitation. We must do everything in our power to overcome it. Think about that. He said that humans are the highest forms on the planet. We get that. But our fear is what limits our blessings. We're blocking our own good by believing that something out there is more powerful than what's in here. So what do we do about this? He goes on to say, to overcome fear is the greatest adventure of the mind of man. Releasing our fears and moving our minds into greater and greater love is the adventure of our lives. So how do we do that? Practice knowing our fears and change our relationship to them. So let's take a look at those three big fears one at a time, and let's know them a little bit more this morning and see if there's a bigger spiritual truth that's bigger than the fear and moves us closer to love. Let's see if there's love that's bigger than the fear. So the first one, the fear of not being good enough. All right, this fear can show up in a lot of different ways, can it? Fear of public speaking is the fear of not being good enough. Fear of other people's judgment is the fear of not being good enough. Fear of failure, fear of being wrong, fear of being fired, fear of loving relationships, fear of so many things and experiences. They all boil down to that core fear. Somehow I am not adequate in this moment that I'm in. And you know what? The truth is that as a human being, you truly may not have the skills to do many things. You might not. You may not have the personality type to thrive in certain situations or enjoy certain experiences. That might be true. As a human being, we have this natural physical and mental tendency that is who we are. But part of being the spiritual essence that's inside this magic suit, part of that means that you can only do what your magic suit will allow you to do, right? And we spend our whole lives figuring out, what will my magic suit do and do well, right? What will my personality handle well? What can my mind accomplish and what can it not? But is any of that something to fear? Are you really less than someone else simply because you play in your magic suit differently than someone else does? Are you really, really not good enough because you access your emotions more quickly and easily than someone else who reacts with more resolve and strength in a stressful situation? Really? Does that make you less than? I think on a human level, you are not better or less than anyone. You are different from other people. And measuring yourself against anyone else, it's that crazy comparison thing that we do. It's pointless and ridiculous, and quite frankly, it's not natural. It's not natural. Is a tiger less than an elephant just because it can't spray water with its nose? Nature understands fully. It understands fully that comparing two different creatures is pointless, right? So I invite you to look this common fear right in the eye and know it. On a human level, we're all different and we have different skills, but we've got to love ourselves as we are and know that wherever you are a magnificent spiritual being. The same energy of life that runs through you runs through every single other person just the same. The core essence, that part of you inside is who you really are. That's your truest identity. And it's more than enough in any human situation that you may find yourself in. Remember that you have all the qualities of God within you. And you've never been inadequate, ever, ever. So the next time you feel yourself withdrawing in fear of not being good enough, ask yourself, Am I just simply experiencing a different level of human ability? And if so, that's just a natural part of life as a human being. Natural part. So next time you face something that seems scary, then you feel like you're not enough, just stop for a minute. The second fear is the fear of the unknown. So this fear comes up whenever change happens, whether we're initiating that change or someone else is causing the change in your life. Any new situation can trigger the fear of the unknown. I'm sure you can relate to that, right? Lots of questions come up for us when we're in the middle of this fear. What is going to happen to me? Where will I end up? How will this impact my life? How will it impact the lives around me? The fear of the unknown, in some ways, it kind of boils back down to, am I good enough? Will I be enough in the situation? Will I be able to manage whatever comes down this road, right? So what is the spiritual truth bigger than that fear? The spiritual truth is that your consciousness, your mindset, prepares the way for you. If you have a consciousness of prosperity and wholeness and love and intelligence, whatever road you find yourself on, your experiences will reflect your consciousness. Whatever you're sending out into the world will be reflected back to you in the law of circulation. That's always happening. So we are hardwired, and I've said this before, we are hardwired to make the best choices we can make in any situation in any given moment. We assimilate all the information we have, and we make a decision which takes us on a path resulting from that decision. And where that path may lead may in fact be unknown, and there may be many surprises down the path we take. But the truth is, in any moment, you are at choice. You have within your power to make a new choice and change your direction. You have the power within you to handle whatever you find on your path. So the next time you're kind of fearfully saying, I don't know what I should do, I don't know, your soul knows. So stop. Your soul knows. The God within you knows. You may end up having a new experience that you've never had before, but the power within you is greater than any of those situations you may encounter. Turn within and tap into that. Trust that divine intelligence is with you all the time. So face that fear and do it anyway. Know that whatever comes, you'll be able to handle it. And the third fear, the fear of death and loss. Within this fear is the truth that you will experience death and loss. It's part of being human. The truth is, all form is temporary. All structures, all of it. They're eventually going to collapse. The situations you're involved in right now will eventually end. All life forms eventually die. Energy is always turning itself into something else. The question becomes, is that something to fear? And is the suffering necessary? So let's take the fear of loss first. No one enjoys the experience of loss. Except weight loss, right? Well, we do like that. But all kidding aside, we don't like loss. We just don't. We want things that we love to be permanent in our lives. And that's completely understandable. But sometimes the pursuit of achieving permanence can be quite disturbing. We all know people who are so controlling of their family members out of the fear of loss, right? We know people who lock up their possessions without enjoying them because of the fear of loss. Parents who can't let their kids grow up and out of their hyperprotective and crippling mindset because of the fear of loss. And when it's taken to the extreme, the fear of loss is obviously not helpful, right? Not helpful. Accepting things are impermanent is the healthy antidote to this fear, because forms are meant to be temporary, and facing this fear is a practice I highly recommend. Allow the truth of impermanence to evoke this deep appreciation and enjoyment of all the forms in your life, the people, the circumstances, the structures, or whatever, but adopting a mindset of this too shall pass, this too shall pass. and lean into enjoying everything when it's here and not worrying about the fact that it will fade, sometimes quickly or sometimes slowly. So let's look at the mama jama of all fears, the fear of death, right? Here's the deal. The truth is that many, many cultures on earth do not fear death. They don't fear death. Our American culture is one that is obviously an avoidance of death and dying and anything related to it. But because we know that other cultures don't have that mindset, we know it's been taught to us. We've been taught that. It's not our natural truth. That means that if we were taught something, then we could decide whether or not we want to keep it, right? So many people lean on religion. They lean on faith to kind of solve their fear of death or to soothe it. And the concept of this heavenly place that we go to where we meet at the pearly gates or whatever is the only way to comfort some people when other people die, right? And that's just fine. That's just fine. Faith in our own belief systems can be very, very helpful when looking at the fear of death. And the science of mind approach, in case you're curious, the science of mind approach to death is the idea that if our inner spirit needs a form to express itself in, we have a form. And when we no longer need a form to express our highest self, we shed the form, right? Some people call this reincarnation, although Ernest Holmes stops short of that word. But I like to say that our souls know what they need to know. Our souls know what they need to know when it's time to drop the physical body. Spirit is part of that life experience as much as spirit is a part of any of our life experiences. So if we can dismantle many fears in our lives, what would change? What would change if you didn't have fear? Yes, when we accept our fears as just the way I am, just the way I do things, just what I avoid, that's just who I am, we're not on the greatest adventure of our lives, challenging our fears and overcoming them. We allow our good to be limited. That's what fear does. So in preparation for the talk today, I did a little bit of reading about fear, and I found this very interesting article written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. If her name's familiar, she's the author that writes a lot about death and dying. And she asked this question. She says, if we could literally reach into you and remove all your fears, every one of them, how different would your life be? If nothing stopped you from following your dreams, your life would probably be very different. And that is what the dying learned. Dying makes our worst fears come forward to be faced directly. It helps us see the different life that is possible, and in that vision takes the rest of our fears away. Think about that for a second. What would happen if all your fears were removed right now instead of on your deathbed, but right now? You know, so many people, by the time the fear leaves them, they are too old or too sick to actually enjoy living. So what if we did it now? There's an example in nature that I want to share, and I know you may have heard it. I know I've heard it many times, but it bears repeating. You know, Bill sang a song from The Lion King, and this is about lions. So most of us have seen the National Geographic or Discovery Channel special of lions hunting in Africa. I'm sure you've seen that too. And whether you know it or not, it appears that the males are hunting, but the lionesses are actually the hunters. The males are inherently too slow and lazy, so they make the women die. No comment there. But anyway, but the male does play a very specific role. He will get on one side of the watering hole, and all the gazelles and all the other animals are on the other. And he will flare his mane, and he will get as big as he can, and he lets out this ferocious roar. And what does the roar do? It scares the prey, it scares the gazelles to run away from it. And what the prey doesn't know is that the lionesses have strategically circled the other side, on the opposite side of the watering hole. So when the gazelle is running away from the roar, what they think is safety, they have actually run toward a much bigger challenge. If they would have run toward the roar, as counterintuitive and frightening as that may seem, they would have fared better. because the male lion's bark is worse than its bite, right? But can you see the moral of the story? When we turn and run from fear, when we turn and run, we face bigger challenges, greater challenges, and we create bigger messes. When we start trying to avoid certain people or certain situations, when we're kind of going out of our way to stay away from experiencing hard things, all of that becomes way more challenging than if we just faced it. So hopefully your fears that you think about today fall into one of our categories we've talked about, but taking them one by one, consider the bigger spiritual truth of every situation and what would happen if you actually experienced one of those fear emotions and instead of running away from it or trying to avoid it, you actually turned toward it and got curious about it or moved toward the fear and experiencing it. If you made it your lifelong quest to overcome your fears one by one, how could you face them and experience them with more freedom? And that's the very point Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was making. When you're dying and you can no longer run, you turn and face it, and then you just want to live more, right? So I want to close with a cute little Halloween story, because I can. It's about my daughter, and it illustrates my lesson, and it takes us kind of full circle back to haunted houses, right? So if you've heard this before, I shared the story many years ago, but I'll say it again because it's really cute. So when Kelsey was 6, one of our neighbors across the street built an elaborate haunted house in their driveway for the neighborhood. And she watched them build it every day, and she would stare at it and she would look at it, and she was scared to death of it. But finally it was Halloween night, and she was dressed, and I wanted her to eat some dinner before it was time to go trick-or-treating. And so she was sitting in her little Dorothy Wizard of Oz red ruby slippers little dress thing, sitting there eating dinner. And I asked her, I said, Kelsey, are you ready to go through that haunted house across the street? And she sat and she thought for a second. She thought for a long moment. And then she said, I will, Mommy, but it's going to scare the big Jesus out of me. I still say that phrase. It's too cute to lose, right? So after dinner was over, she felt the fear, but she dug deep and she found her love of Halloween and her pride in being a big girl, and she did it anyway. She just marched across the street and took herself through that little haunted house, and she has the memories to prove it. And I was kind of reminded of my own childhood haunted house experiences, and I think I healed a little bit in the midst of her 6-year-old determination. But may we all be like Kelsey and face our fears, and whatever is keeping you from living your most outrageous and beautiful life, let them scare the big Jesus out of you. But find the truth in spirit and do it anyway. Happy Halloween. Thank you.